Shalom Aleichem. Page 63 of the Maharal on Pirkei Avot, the Maharal of Prague. We were using something that was given to us by Rabbi Tuvia Basser, a book, absolutely excellent. The Maharal, Rabbi Judah Low of Prague, based upon his commentary to Pirkei Avot. Pirkei Avot, the chapters of the fathers in the Mishnah, okay? We actually, the last time we were together, we completed the first chapter of Pirkei Avot. We're on page 63 because there's some good things that we need to look at here just a little bit before we go to chapter 2. And the author wants to point out, or actually the Maharal wants to point out in his commentary, what the relationship of the closing, the last Mishnayot that we studied together to the rest of the first part of chapter 1, because we've seen that there's been a relationship between every one of the Mishnah, or Mishnayot, just like there was a relationship between all the great sages who said them, okay? So he begins and he says, the advice of the earlier rabbis of this chapter, who were the pairs, okay, and who were also known as the fathers of the world, that they aim to perfect the very substance of life. And if you remember back when we were studying them, which that substance of life is the love and the fear of God, the love of Hashem and the fear of Hashem, which really are two sides of one coin in a sense. And I'm not going to get off into all of it right now because we've talked about it many, many times, and I'll end up repeating lesson after lesson over and over again here. So the love and the fear of Hashem. Then came Rabban Gamliel. Then it says he offered advice aimed at perfecting a person himself in all three degrees of the intellect, the abstract intellect, practical intelligence, and the planning or imagination. Very interesting. Likewise, his son, Shimon, gave advice to perfect man as a physical being. But neither of these rabbis actually dealt with the love and the fear of God, but with the perfection of a person himself. And he goes on, he says, with the development of the human personality now completed, then comes Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, and he describes how mankind's existence, the existence of mankind, is also the basis of the existence of the world. All right? Now, he has a section here on the missing generations. I'm not sure whether to get into it or not, but I'm going to go ahead. All right? Simply because it can become confusing. Okay? So, see, we have Hillel the Great, and then his son Shimon, okay? And then his son Gamliel the first, and then his son Shimon again, and then his son Yehudah, Rabbi Yehudah HaNasi, and then his son Gamliel the second, okay? You got all them in your brains, okay, all right. He says the history of Torah transmission from Moshe Rabbeinu to after the destruction of the second temple is actually traced in chapter 1, which we've finished. Following the 5 pairs of rabbinical leaders, in other words, you remember there were 5 separate pairs, then there are 2 omissions. One of those omissions is Hillel's own son Shimon, who is not mentioned in chapter 1. Shimon's son, Gamliel, is the author of Mishnah 16 that we read, okay, the last time we were together. Then Gamliel's grandson, Rabban Gamliel, who lived at the time of Rabbi Akiva, is first mentioned over in chapter 2. The Maharal, he says, gives several reasons for these omissions. In other words, see, it should have followed. I mean, they were leaders. So why didn't it record a Mishnah from them also in chapter 1? And here's what the Maharal is thinking. He says he gives several reasons for these omissions. One reason is that each of the 2 omitted leaders served concurrently or at the same time with another leader who was not a descendant of Hillel. The Mishnah chose in this chapter, he says, not to delve into the leadership in that degree of complexity. I'm sure the Maharal knows exactly what he's talking about. I can think of even more reasons for that. of why they were omitted. But anyway, with the omission of these two rabbis, this is another reason. Chapter 1 has exactly, if we leave those two out, then chapter 1 has exactly 10 generations that are listed, just as God created the world with 10 statements. All right? Which, by the way, when we get to chapter 5 of Pirkei Avot, we're going to find out it's really an intense discussion on those 10 statements and 10 things that were created before the world and on and on. It's very interesting. Anyway, he goes on. Shimon HaTzadik in Mishnah number 2 lists for us the 3 pillars that are the sources of existence and that correspond to the beginning of the week of creation. The statement of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel at the conclusion of the chapter lists 3 bases for sustaining the creation when it was completed at the first Shabbat. In other words, there's a relationship there. One's at the beginning of the week, the other's at the end of the week. All right? In between, what do we have? We have these 10 statements. Just as there were 10 statements of creation from the beginning until the first Shabbat, so there are 10 stages of rabbinical statements from Shimon HaTzadik until Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. He says it's significant that the first chapter of Avot provides 10 sets of statements of what are known as the world's fathers, corresponding to the 10 statements of the world's creator. It's very interesting, and I'm sure that if we actually took the time and were able to really delve into the statements themselves and the statements of creation, that there would be a correspondence in some way. All right, other than just numerical. There would also be a content correspondence. Okay. He gives for us now a summary of chapter 1, which I think it's a good idea that we go over and remember what we have learned in chapter 1 of Pirkei Avot. The structure of creation, he says, actually unfolds through this chapter. The Holy One, blessed is He is above all, and His Torah is above the world in the hierarchy of existence, for it is the very beginning of existence. In fact, he has a note here coming from actually Bereshit Rabbah, which is a midrash, in chapter 1 of Bereshit Rabbah, on the word Bereshit. He has it there for you in Hebrew, translated in the beginning. And it says Bereshit refers to Torah, which is called, now you see the bait on the front of the word is gone, and it just says Reshit, which means the beginning of His way, the first of His works of old, in Mishlei 8:22, Proverbs 8:22. So what Proverbs 8:22 tells us is that the Torah is Reshit. It's the beginning of His way, the first of His works of old, okay? So they take that, and the Midrash does, and applies that back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, Bereshit, in the beginning, but it could also be just as easy, in Torah. In the Torah, He began to create. Very, 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 very interesting, okay? All right, so he says it's the very beginning of existence. For that reason, this reason, the men of the Great Assembly initiated the Musar, the admonitions, the advice of Pirkei Avot, or initiated the Musar of Pirkei Avot with advice to strengthen Torah. Shimon HaTzadik then enumerated the foundations on which the world stands: Torah study, the service of God, and Gemilut Chasadim, the doing kind deeds. Next, Antigonos focused on the human being as the starting point for the world, because mankind, as we know, is actually, according to Torah, is the justification. Ha'adam, the man, is justification for the rest of the creation. All the rest of the creation exists in some way to benefit a human being in order to bring him closer to Hashem. That's the idea, and which we learned back when we were studying in Derek Hashem by the Ramchal. By strengthening the love and the fear of God, Antigonos improved mankind as the single basis of the world, just as Shimon HaTzadik had addressed the world on a more general level. Now he says the subsequent pairs, okay, they aimed at improving the quality of mankind's existence, first from the closest relationship to the most distant relationship. They began addressing family, and then teachers, and then friends, and finally like subordinates. Their advice strengthened all aspects of the love and the fear of God, from the most direct levels to the most subtle. The latter generations then turned to perfecting the person himself, with advice to strengthen the intellectual and finally even the physical components of a human being. As we said, Shimon HaTzadik identified the three things through which the foundations of the source of the world are connected to the Creator. By contrast, the three things mentioned by Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel at the end of the chapter support the world by virtue of its completeness and fulfillment of purpose. You remember this was the idea of peace. This world comes from God and returns to Him when it is what? When it is shalem, which is the root of the word for shalom. Therefore, it requires pillars to support it at its origin and at its completion. Peace, shalom, is achieved when all parts are finally brought into harmony, and peace is the ultimate plateau, and hence comes, he says, only at the end. For this reason, the priestly blessing and the daily prayers conclude with the blessing of peace. Ve'yosim l'ka shalom, they say, and put on you peace. And this chapter, he says, also appropriately concludes with the pinnacle of all creation, which is Ve'yosim l'ka shalom, and put on you peace. Peace, okay? Now, if we turn the page, then there's a quote, or the final, it's not a Mishnah. You remember there are two in every chapter of Pirkei Avot. At the beginning of the chapter, it will say, all Yisrael has a share in the world to come, as it is said, quoting from Isaiah chapter 60, verse 21, and your people are all righteous. They shall inherit the land forever. They are the stem of my plantings, my handiwork in which to take pride. Okay? Now, all chapters of Pirkei Avot also conclude with this saying from Rabbi Hananiah ben Akashia. And I thought to myself, I wasn't, and I told you, I think before, I wasn't going to get into it. And I'm just going to read it, and we're going to go on. Because people get into, and we've explained this so many times that it just makes me a little crazy now to have to explain it over and over again. But anytime I tackle it, because I know some people who are listening are not catching really what's being said, I feel the need to go into deep explanation, you know. But basically, all of them come like this at the end, every chapter. Rabbi Hananiah ben Akashia says, the Holy One, blessed is He, He wished to confer merit upon Israel. So He gave them Torah and mitzvot in abundance. As it is said, he's quoting now from the prophets, from Isaiah 42:21. This is a quote. Hashem desired, for the sake of His righteousness, that the Torah be made great and glorious. Now, we could say a lot in here. In fact, I do want us to look at one thing. And if you have the book by Rabbi Tuvia Basser, it's on page 69, where it says, Maharal and Derek Chaim actually opens our eyes to the spiritual structure of creation. He explains that Torah is the tree of life rooted in God's existence. It's actually literally rooted in the Ein Sof. And that Torah study and practice cause beauty and worth to flow into our lives. And this is what Rabbi Hananiah ben Akashia is saying. Hashem wanted His people, Israel, to be beautiful, so He gave them commandments to keep. A lot of them. The Torah imbues life with the continuous potential to establish a multifaceted relationship with God, which will be the basis of our eternal existence in the world to come. Now see that, and this is the idea that makes some people crazy, because some people, they want everything must be given to them. None of us, no matter how hard we work, no matter how hard we try to keep commandments, no matter how hard we try to do any of those things, none of us deserve the world to come. None of us deserve Hashem having a relationship with us. But as the Talmud says, if someone comes and tells you, I didn't do any work and yet I found, don't believe them. Believe only the person who says, I did the hard work and I found. That person you can believe. Because without any effort, this is not going to happen to you. And our effort in this world is still our basis of life in the world to come, on whatever level that might be, whatever place Hashem may choose to reward us with. All right? The Christian concepts of law and grace do not work. And the reason, and I hate to say it that way, but they do not work simply because they didn't come from the rabbis and they don't come from the Torah. They misunderstand everything. To think, and I need to find it again in the commentary of the Me'am Loez. The Me'am Loez commentary on the Torah has an unbelievable statement somewhere in the commentary on the book of Leviticus, on Vayikra, where the rabbi simply says, and I'm sure it's in reaction to Christians, and this is over 500 years ago, and he says, the commandments of the Torah are not given to us to save us. They're given to us because Hashem wants us to be beautiful. He wants to give merit to us. He wants us to have a wonderful, beautiful place in the world to come. And that's why. Let's finish this. He says, which will be the basis of our eternal existence in the world to come, although the opportunity to spend eternity in God's close presence is a foreboding challenge. Nobody thinks of it that way, because they don't have enough respect for God to even think of it that way. I mean, their level of the fear of Hashem is so low or non-existence, they don't even see that the opportunity to spend eternity in close presence, close to Hashem, is a foreboding challenge. The rabbis of the Mishnah and the Talmud have provided us with the knowledge and the guidance that we need to achieve this ultimate spiritual success. The Torah, that the Torah be made great means that He gave much Torah. He says, and glorious refers to an abundance of mitzvot. This is what the prophet is talking about. So Hashem desired, for the sake, by the way, of His righteousness, because He is the ultimate tzaddik. Absolutely. He doesn't treat us any other way except in a good way. Just as a tzaddik in this world would treat somebody, even their enemy, in a good way. We expect and we think God, our views of God sometimes are just not correct. That's all there is to it. Okay. And let's move to chapter 2, which again starts with an unbelievably, we mentioned it a minute ago, an unbelievably controversial statement among many people. All Yisrael has a share in the world to come. Let's move on. Okay? Okay. Let's read the Mishnah first. Mishnah, Pirkei Avot, chapter 2, Mishnah number 1. Rabbi says, we'll come back, which is the proper path that a man should choose for himself? Here's the answer. Whatever is a credit to himself, or literally he says tiferet, whatever is beautiful, okay, to himself, and earns him the esteem or the credit or the beauty, other people think he's beautiful, and earns him the esteem of fellow men. Now, there's a lot of explanation that has to go in here. Let's go on. Then he says, and by the way, if you notice, he changes voice here. It's a completely different kind of thing going on. We'll talk about that too, though. He says, be as scrupulous in performing a minor mitzvah, something you may think is a minor mitzvah, as in a major one, as in a great one. For you do not know the reward that is given for the respective mitzvot. We don't have a clue, because we're not rewarded for them in this world. Listen to the next thing he says. This is all still Mishnah 1. Calculate the loss due to a mitzvah against its reward. we'll explain this also. And the reward of a sin against its cost. Consider, he says, three things, and you will not come into the grip of sin. Oh, here they are. Know what is above you, a watchful eye, an attentive ear, a hearing ear, and all your deeds are written in a book or recorded in a book. That's the end of it. Okay, let's come back. Who is Rabbi? Who in the world could this be? Rabbi is Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Judah the Prince, okay? He is almost always in the Mishnah. By the way, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi is the one who put together for us the entire Mishnah. He put it down in writing. He broke the prohibition to write down the oral Torah, and he is the one who put it down in writing for us. He accomplished that in Tiberias, next to the Sea of Galilee, which is most appropriate. You know, there are 4 holy cities in Israel that are regarded as holy, varying levels of holiness. Jerusalem, of course. And all of those cities, by the way, are associated with a particular element. Jerusalem is associated with fire. Hebron is another. It's associated with earth, all right? Safed or Tzfat in the mountains in the north of Israel, which was the home of the Arizal, which is associated with Kabbalah. The element it's associated with is the air. But Tiberias, which is also a holy city, even though it was a Roman city built by the Romans, it's a holy city because of Rabbi Judah Hanassi, of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, and that the Mishnah, the foundational work of all the oral Torah, was first written down there. And it's associated, of course, with the Sea of Galilee, so it's associated with water. Now, we know in the symbols of the Torah, water is always a symbol of the Torah. It's very interesting. So there's a deep connection there. All right? Anyway, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi.
What year?
About 200. Okay? Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi was the president, he says, of the rabbinical court. I can't read either. Excuse me. Of the rabbinical court, of the Sanhedrin, in other words, and the last Sanhedrin, and the leader of all of Jewry. In other words, see, we're talking about most of the Jews had been dispersed into all over the world. We've had the first Jewish revolt and the destruction of the temple, 68 through 70. Then in 135 or something like that, maybe 132 to 135, I'm just guessing, I can't remember the exact dates, we had the second Jewish revolt under Bar Kokhba, and now around the year 200, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, he's still in the land of Israel, and there's still Jews in the land of Israel, but much of the Jewish people has been dispersed all over the Roman Empire. They're in exile. But he was the leader of all Jewry everywhere, recognized everywhere, in no matter what country. He was the son of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, all right? So that would make him, let's see, Hillel the Great, then Shimon his son, then Gamliel would be his grandson, and then Shimon ben Gamliel would be his great-grandson. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi was the great-great-grandson of, is that right, or the great-great-grandson? The great-great-grandson of Hillel. Hillel, Shimon, Gamliel, grandson, great-grandson, great-great-grandson, great-great-grandson of Hillel the Great. Okay? Now, chapter 1, he says, of Pirkei Avot, chronicled the rabbinical dynasty of Hillel's descendants as far as Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi's words could well have been joined to his father's words, it says at the end of that chapter. However, the comprehensive scope of this musar, of what he is trying to teach us here, and the eminence of its author, because he was known simply, all through the Talmud, he is simply called Rabbi, which is a level of honor to him that means he is the rabbi, okay? So the eminence of its author, he says, serve best as the start of a new chapter. Now, actually, we're about out of time in this one. So I think what we'll do is the very next time we're together, we'll begin to start with what the Rabbi says. He says, which is the proper path that a man should choose for himself? And we'll try to go through this Mishnah and get as much out of it as we can. Okay? All right? Cool with you? Then it's cool with me. Okay. So, shalom uvrakah, peace and a blessing. Bye.